The term critical thinking has become very popular of late and is heard regularly in the media. The people using the term are usually implying that they are doing it and that other people should also. But how many people actually are? Oddly enough, the term does bring an image to mind, though the phrase critical thinking was not originally associated with it. Critical thinking is just a verbose way of saying logic. Why use 5 syllables when you can use 2? Critical thinking is illogical. Wouldn't Mr. Spock point out something so obvious? The fictional character created by Gene Roddenberry presented us with the concept of a culture of logic ruling an entire planet. Not only was Spock second in command, but he was the science officer and the computer expert. Keeping that fictional show in perspective, remember that it began before the moon landing, and the space program was going great guns at the time, and most Americans had probably never seen a computer in the flesh. To most people, Mr. Spock was somewhat of a joke back then. But it is now 40 years after the moon landing, and climate scientists are using computer simulations to tell us that we are wrecking the planet. Are we supposed to listen to stupid scientists because of some garbage that comes out of a computer? Are they as much of a joke as Mr. Spock? But that scientific road of logic or critical thinking that got us to the moon certainly did not start with Mr. Spock. Though some ideas can be traced further back, Isaac Newton must be credited with putting a major milestone on that road. Being able to accurately predict the motions of the planets must have been an astonishing concept in his day. Now those equations can be coded into computers, which have become powerful enough to produce excellent simulations. It is like the science fiction of Star Trek has become real in the last 40 years, and now we have to live with it. Are we not smart enough to cope with it, or are we just too confused to handle it? This technology is not going to go away, so we had better do something. But there is another aspect of Mr. Spock that involves another great shaper of Western thought. Mr. Spock was not just a Vulcan, he was a human-Vulcan hybrid. This can bring evolution and Charles Darwin into the picture. There were many incidents in the original Star Trek series where Mr. Spock demonstrated abilities superior to those of mere humans. Maybe the Vulcans should just wipe us out. Survival of the fittest and all that. Surely Vulcans can see the logic of eliminating irrational humans. But kidding aside, physics and Darwin's biology were without question applications of critical thinking used to comprehend how reality works. But there still appears to be a serious problem here. You see, Newton was a Christian, although possibly a somewhat peculiar one, whereas Darwin was an atheist. So where has that rationality gone? Doesn't one of them have to be wrong? Maybe so, but that does not necessarily mean that there is any way to determine which. Just because something is false does not necessarily mean enough reliable information can be collected to know that it is false. Just because something is true does not necessarily mean enough reliable information can be collected to know that it is true. Many people do not accept that the I don't know position is really a totally logical position. But pretending to know what cannot be known is confusing ego with intellect and totally illogical. But Newton is used by Christians as though his belief proves something, and Darwin is used by atheists for the same purpose. Does Newton's Christianity make his ideas and equations about physics incorrect? Do atheists get to junk Newtonian physics because of that? That physics got us to the moon. It will be as eternal as the moons of Jupiter. So can atheists be scientific, intelligent, and rational if they cannot apply Newtonian physics here on Earth? Why should atheists be taken seriously if they can't deal with a little gravity and the conservation of momentum? With all of this talk about critical thinking, how has this problem of collapsing skyscrapers not been resolved in 8 years? Does science mean believing some authority that you decide to trust, or does critical thinking mean understanding as much as you can for yourself? Which authority do you trust on God, Newton or Darwin? Are skyscrapers more complicated than religion? At least critical thinking can be applied to how much steel must have been put where in a skyscraper. It is not like the experts haven't proven that they know how to build the structures often enough. So isn't it a failure of critical thinking to not demand to be told about the steel if you are supposed to accept that a 400,000-ton building can be destroyed by a 150-ton airliner in less than 2 hours? What would Mr. Spock do?